The dust came up off that dirt road like smoke off a brush fire, and the noise got so loud it sent the chickens running every which way across the yard. 15 big trucks came climbing the hill toward Walter's little house, one behind the other, and the ground shook under all them wheels. Right in the middle of the yard, the rancher Silas stopped the eviction paper in the air, and he couldn't make sense of a thing. Silas had come up there to take old Walter's land for good, with 2 court officers standing beside him and half the town watching from down the road. He gave a crooked little grin and said it loud so everybody could hear. "Must be his moving truck, folks. The poor old fool is finally clearing out of here." That was when the first truck stopped, and the door started to open real slow. Before I go on, do me one favor, hit that like button and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from, because your like and your comment are what push this story out to more folks who need to hear it. Now hold on tight, because what comes next is going to give you chills right down to your bones. But to understand how a simple countryman ended up standing in the middle of 15 trucks, we got to go back 10 years to one rainy night that changed everybody's life in this story. Back then, Walter didn't have hardly anything to his name, just a little piece of land he got from his daddy and a small herd of maybe 20-odd cows out in the pasture. Walter was a man of about 50, with big, rough hands from working the hoe his whole life, married to Martha, a woman of deep faith who baked the best cornbread in those parts. The 2 of them weren't rich, not by a long shot, but they had food on the table and they slept with a clean conscience every single night. And that right there was the thing that ate at their neighbor, the rancher Silas. Silas was the richest man around, owner of half the land your eyes could reach, and for years he'd wanted to swallow up Walter's little patch of ground and add it to the rest. Only the old man never once wanted to sell, and a fella who won't bow down to the powerful is the very thing the powerful hates most in this world. Silas just sat and waited for Walter to slip up so he could get his hands on that land. On that night of hard rain, Walter was riding home from town on his horse, soaked clean through, when he spotted a shape lying in the ditch by the road. It was a skinny man, caked in mud from head to toe, shaking with fever and cold, with barely the strength to lift his face out of the muck. Most anybody would have rode right past out of fear. But Walter wasn't most anybody. He got down off that horse right then and there. Walter knelt down in the mud, put his hand on the man's shoulder and asked him, worried sick, "Can you hear me, mister? Come on now, let me help you up." The man opened his eyes with a whole lot of trouble and could only whisper, near about voiceless, "Just let me die right here. I done lost everything I had in this life anyhow." Walter didn't think twice about it. He got his arms up under the man and heaved, but the stranger was dead weight and slick with mud, and the horse spooked and sidestepped in the rain. Walter said it through his teeth, straining hard. "Easy, girl. Easy now." He tried a second time, dug his boots down into the mud, and finally got the man up and laid him over the saddle. The stranger groaned and mumbled, Why are you doing this? Just leave me be." The rain came down heavy the whole way, and Walter held that stranger up with one arm while he steered the horse with the other. He kept talking low into the man's ear so he wouldn't let him fade out on him. "Hold on now, friend. We're almost there. Don't you close them eyes on me. I'm taking you somewhere warm." And that's how the 2 of them showed up at the little house, dripping wet from head to toe. When he came through the door, Martha near about jumped out of her skin, seeing her husband soaked to the bone and carrying a stranger who was half passed out. But she had a heart just as big as her husband's. She ran and got the dry blankets out of the chest, put the pot of chicken broth on the fire, and helped wash the mud off that man. In the weak light of the lamp, the stranger slowly came back to life. Martha rubbed the man's cold feet with a warm rag and pulled the blanket up under his chin, talking low the whole time like she was tending a sick child. "There now, you're safe. Nobody's gonna hurt you here." She looked at her husband across the room, worried, and said soft, "Walter, this man's burning up with fever. We got to keep him warm all night." And she pulled a chair up beside him and sat down to watch over him. The man's name was Nathan. He ate the broth with his hands still shaking. And when he could talk right, he told them his story with his voice all choked up with tears. He'd lost his farm, he'd lost his wife to a bad sickness, and now he had just one thing left in this world. A little girl, Annie, 6 years old, in a hospital in a big city far off, sick, needing a surgery that cost a fortune. Walter pulled up a stool and sat down in front of the man to hear him out proper. Nathan said the little girl had something wrong with her heart, and that the doctors had set the operation, but they wanted the money up front, or they wouldn't do it. He said, "I walked 3 whole days looking for work to scrape that money together, Walter. I knocked on every farm, every store. Not one soul would give me so much as a plate of food." Nathan cried in front of them, 2 strangers, like a lost little child. He said it real soft, staring down at the dirt floor. "She's gonna die, Walter. My little girl's gonna die in a hospital far away, all alone, and I can't do a thing about it. A father who can't save his own child don't even deserve to be alive. Better I died out there on the road tonight." Walter reached over and put his big hand on the man's bony shoulder and said it steady. "Now you listen to me. You ain't dying tonight, and neither is that little girl. You're gonna eat, you're gonna sleep, and come morning we're gonna figure this thing out. A man ain't finished long as there's breath in him." Nathan looked up at him, not understanding why a stranger would care one bit, and just nodded, worn out. Martha held back her tears in the kitchen, wringing the dish towel in both hands hard. Walter sat quiet a long while, just watching the fire in the stove dance around. He knew good and well what a surgery like that cost. He knew he didn't have that kind of money tucked away anywhere. The only thing of worth he had in this world was them 20-odd cows in the pasture, the sweat of a whole life of work. That night, Walter didn't sleep a wink. He sat out on the porch listening to the rain beat on the tin roof, thinking about that man's little girl dying in a hospital far off. Before the rooster crowed, he woke Martha up gentle and said it firm. "Woman, I'm gonna sell the cattle. Every last head." Martha's eyes went wide in the dark, her heart squeezing, and she asked, "All of them, Walter? And what are we gonna live on after that?" Walter took his wife's hand, looked deep into her eyes, and answered with a calm that only a man with peace in his heart can have. "We're poor, Martha, but we're alive and we got each other. That man in there is losing his little girl. If I got a way to save a child and I just fold my arms, then what good is all this faith we carry? God gave me that cattle, and I know just what he wants me to do with it." Martha stayed quiet a few seconds, doing the math in her head of how hard it'd be to live without the cattle, her eyes filling up with water. Then she thought about the little girl, and she didn't have a doubt left in her. She hugged her husband real tight and said in his ear, "Then sell it, my old love. Sell all of it, and may God have mercy on us." That's how them two, with a hug in the dark kitchen, decided to give away everything they had. When the day broke and Nathan found out what Walter aimed to do, he threw himself down on the floor and grabbed the old man's feet, crying his eyes out. "No, Walter, I can't take this. That's a whole life of cattle you got there. You barely even know me. We met last night." Walter lifted the man up by the arm, firm, and said it plain. "I know a desperate father when I see one. That's plenty for me." Before he set off for the market, Walter went into the bedroom to fetch the most precious thing he had after the cattle, the old pocket watch that had belonged to his daddy. It was silver, all worn down by time, but it was worth good money. He put the watch in Nathan's hand and said, "Take this too. Sell it if you need a little more. Your little girl's life is worth more than any keepsake I got tucked away in a drawer." Nathan held that watch like it was made of solid gold and couldn't get out another word for all the crying he was doing. Right then, he made a promise nobody there took to heart. "Walter, I swear on my late wife's soul that one day I'm coming back to this yard. And when I come back, I'm going to give you back everything, 1,000 times over." Walter just smiled gentle and gave him a little pat on the shoulder. While he was fixing the saddle on the horse, Walter went on warning Nathan about the dangers of the road and the folks around there, and he let the neighbor's name slip. "Around here you gotta watch out for a fella named Silas. A greedy rancher who's already cheated a whole lot of good people in this place. The second he heard that name, Nathan went white as a sheet and stopped fussing with the reins, like a man who took a punch straight to the gut. Walter thought that reaction was mighty strange, but he figured it was just the tiredness and the fever from the night before. Nathan took a deep breath, swallowed hard, and didn't say another word about it. But way down deep, something old and real painful had woke up in that man's chest. What Walter didn't know was that Name was about to tie the two lives together in a way nobody could have guessed. The next morning, bright and early, Walter drove the whole herd to the cattle market in town. Selling like that, all at once and in a big hurry, meant selling cheap, and everybody there knew it good and well. The buyers smelled the old man's desperation right off and started offering pennies for them fat cows. Walter took it anyway, because every minute that passed was a minute less to save little Annie. Word got around the pens fast that old Walter was in a bad bind and had to sell that very day no matter what. So the buyers took their sweet time, kicked at the dirt, ran their hands over the cows and shook their heads slow, driving the price down lower and lower. Walter stood there with the sun beating on the back of his neck, counting the minutes, and took every low offer they threw at him without a fight. One slick buyer walked around the cattle, made an ugly face on purpose and said, "This here stock is skinny, Walter, full of defects. I'll pay you half what it's worth, take it or leave it." It was a flat lie. The cattle were good. But the old man had no time to argue. He just shook the man's hand and said low, "Done. Pay me quick, for the love of God, I'm in a hurry." And he swallowed that loss without a word. It was right in the middle of that unfair deal that the rancher Silas showed up, sitting on his fancy horse, wide-brim hat on his head, and that mocking grin on his face. He stopped right in the middle of the market, in front of all the other ranchers, and spoke real loud so the whole crowd could hear and laugh along. Old Walter felt his face go hot with shame in front of so many people he knew his whole life. Silas pointed his finger at Walter and hollered so the whole market could hear, "Get a load of this, folks. The great Walter is selling his cattle near about for free to hand the money to some beggar he scraped up off the side of the road. You ever heard anything dumber in your whole life?" The whole market busted out laughing. Walter kept his head down, counting them crumpled bills, and didn't answer a single word. A few of the younger men laughed the loudest, slapping their knees, while some of the older folks who knew Walter looked away, ashamed for him. Walter felt his ears burning and his hands shaking around them bills, but he kept right on counting, one note after another, and didn't give Silas the satisfaction of one word back. Inside, though, something in him just went quiet and hard as a stone. But Silas wasn't done. He walked the horse up closer, leaned down in the saddle and set it right in Walter's ear, but loud enough for anyone nearby to catch every word. "Kindness don't pay the bills, Walter. You mark what I'm telling you. You're gonna die poor and alone out in the brush, and this world won't even know you ever lived." And he let out a dry little laugh before he rode off. Walter finished selling everything with his eyes burning from anger and shame, but he didn't let one tear fall in front of those people. He gathered the money up in a cloth sack, tied it off good and tight, and hurried on home. That same afternoon, he put every last bit of that money in Nathan's hands and told the man to run to the big city and save his daughter before it was too late for the little girl.
If that made your blood boil the same as it did mine, go ahead and drop a like right now, because this story is about to flip clean over in a way nobody's expecting.
Nathan set off that sunny afternoon, hugging the sack of money against his chest and crying with gratitude the whole way. Before he disappeared around the bend in the road, he turned one last time and hollered loud at Walter, "You're gonna remember my name, Walter. Nathan! I'm coming back here, I swear on everything I come back." And the dust of the road swallowed him right up. And nobody knew if he'd ever really come back. The months rolled by, and life for Walter and Martha got hard enough to hurt. Without the cattle, there was no milk to sell in town, no calf to raise, near about no money coming in at all. The two of them got by on the little bit the garden gave, and on odd jobs Walter picked up working as a hand on other men's land. But neither one of them, not for one single second, was sorry for what they'd done. There were days with no food on the table, nights of going to bed on nothing but coffee and a little flour in the belly. Walter got up before dawn and worked other folks' fields from sunup to sundown, coming home with his whole body worn out. Martha patched the same old dress for the 10th time. Even so, every night before they lay down, the two of them knelt beside the bed and thanked God for saving that child they barely even knew. One cold night, the pot on the stove had nothing in it but water and a handful of flour, and Martha stirred it slow so Walter wouldn't see her hands trembling. She set the thin gruel down in front of him and said, trying hard to smile, "It ain't much, old man, but it's hot." Walter took her hand across the table and said, "It's a feast, Martha, long as I'm eating it with you." And they ate every drop and gave thanks over it. Time went on, and the day came when Walter had to take out a loan at the bank so he wouldn't lose his crop and could buy seed for the next year. He signed them papers not knowing he was walking straight into a trap. Because the man who bought that debt off the bank, on the sly, hid from everybody, was the very man who wanted most to see old Walter down in the gutter, the rancher Silas. Silas bought the old man's debt real quiet and sat waiting, like a buzzard on a fence post, for Walter to fall behind on one payment so he could swoop. It didn't take long at all. One Sunday morning, coming out of church, with the place full of townsfolk from all over, Silas rolled up in his brand new car, got out in front of everybody, and called Walter out into the middle of the square just to shame the old man in front of the whole town. Silas waved the debt papers in the air and shouted so the square could hear, "Walter, you owe me, and now I'm the one who runs your land. Either you pay me every cent of this, or I take that pig pen you got the nerve to call a farm." The whole town stopped dead to watch. Martha, hanging onto her husband's arm, started crying soft, squeezing her rosary hard in her hands. A hush fell over the churchyard, and the folks in their Sunday clothes just stood there, staring at the ground, none of them daring to say a word against the richest man around. A couple of the women pulled their children in close. Martha's knees near about gave out under her, and she gripped her husband's arm tighter and whispered, "Stay calm, my love, don't give him what he wants." And Walter stood there like a fence post, taking it. Walter felt the whole world spin, but he kept his back straight in front of everybody. He looked Silas dead in the eyes and said it firm, even though he was shattered on the inside. "I'll pay you, Silas, even if I gotta work till I drop dead on the ground. This land is mine and my daddy's blood, and you don't lay a hand on it." Silas laughed right in his face and poured out the same old poison. Silas stepped up one more pace and spat the words out again, now in front of the whole town watching. "Kindness don't pay the bills, you stubborn old man. You gave away everything you had to a drifter who vanished off the face of the earth, and look at what it got you. There you are, in the gutter, the joke of the whole town." Some laughed, uneasy. Others dropped their heads with pity. And Walter went home that Sunday with a heavy weight on his back. That night, Martha found her husband sitting in the dark of the porch, and for the first time in many, many years, she saw old Walter crying quiet, his shoulders shaking. She sat down beside him, took her husband's rough hand, and didn't say a thing, just stayed there, present with him. What them two didn't know was that far, far off in a big city, a man was already gathering his strength to change everything. Martha broke the silence then and said soft, squeezing the old man's hand, "My Walter, I don't regret a thing. We saved a life. If the whole world wants to laugh at us, fine. But God ain't gonna laugh. He saw what we did, and he don't forget about the good folks." Walter leaned his head on his wife's shoulder, and the two of them stayed there on the porch, looking up at the stars till the sleep came. The years dragged on, one after the other, slow and hard. Walter worked from sunup to sundown, paid what he could, but the debt to Silas only grew on account of the high interest the rancher had slapped on it on purpose. It was a debt rigged to never end, a rope tied around the old man's neck that pulled a little tighter with every year that went by, without one single bit of mercy. From Nathan, there was never another word, not a letter, not a message, not a note, nothing at all. The whole town said old Walter had been the biggest fool in the region, that he gave away a life of cattle to a stranger who vanished into the world and never showed his face again. Down at the bar, his name even turned into a word for stupid. But Walter stood firm, not sorry for a thing. One time, down at the town store, a man mocked him right to his face. "So, Walter, where's that rich beggar who was going to pay you back everything?" The laugh went around the whole counter. Walter just looked at the man calm, paid what he owed, and answered before he walked out. "I didn't do good expecting change back, son. I did it because it was right. If that little girl's alive, then it's paid." And he left, with his head held high. Every time they threw it in his face that he'd been played for a fool, Walter always answered the same thing, with a peace nobody there could understand. "I didn't help that man to get anything back. I helped because it was the right thing to do. If his daughter's alive on account of it, then it was worth every cow I sold and every day of hunger I went through." And he closed the subject right there, with no anger in his heart. Then came the bitterest day of them all. Silas, tired of waiting around, decided to take the land for good and turn the whole thing into a big show on top of it. He got a court order for the eviction and picked the worst possible day to carry out his cruelty, right in the middle of the town's patron saint festival, with everybody gathered in the square eating and dancing. On the day of the festival, with the square packed, the band playing and the whole town in high spirits, Silas climbed up on the bandstand, yanked the microphone out of the announcer's hand, and spoke so the whole town could hear. "Folks, next week I'm taking Walter's farm, the man who gave everything to a beggar. Anybody who wants to see the end of the most famous fool in this region can come on out and watch it from the front row." The band went dead quiet in the middle of a song, the accordion wheezing out to nothing, and the whole square turned to look up at the man on the bandstand. Some folks set their plates down. A little kid asked his mama what was going on, and she just shushed him and pulled him in close. Silas stood up there grinning down at them all, soaking up the attention like he owned every soul in that square. The crowd went quiet, uncomfortable, awkward, but not one soul had the nerve to stand up to the richest man in the region. Walter was standing right there in the middle of the crowd, with Martha hanging onto his arm, and he had to swallow all of it without a word, with the whole town turning to look at him. It was the most public and cruel humiliation of them all, the last straw of 10 whole years of suffering. Silas even climbed down off the bandstand, walked over to where Walter stood and said it low, with that snake grin on his face, driving in the same old line one last time. "Kindness don't pay the bills, Walter. Next week I'll swing on by to pick up the key to the gate." And he walked off satisfied, thinking he'd won the war for good, but he didn't have the first idea what was coming up that road. Walter and Martha walked home from the festival on foot, in silence, in the dark of the night. Nobody said a thing, just the sound of the two of them stepping along the dirt road. Martha held tight to her husband's hand, and the old man squeezed right back. They didn't need words. The two of them had long lost count of how many shames they'd swallowed in them 10 years, and now all that was left was to wait for the end. The week flew by for folks who were scared. The marked morning finally came, the day Silas was going to pick up the key and throw the old couple out on the road, and the rancher made sure to turn the whole thing into a circus. He spread the word all over town that there'd be an eviction, so as many people as possible would come watch old Walter's fall. Half the town went up that hill that morning just to see it happen. Silas got there early, all proud and full of himself, with the 2 court officers, the notary's car, and the eviction paper held good and tight in his hand. Martha was on the porch, hugging a little plaster saint, praying with her eyes shut and her lips trembling. Walter stood in the middle of the yard, quiet, staring his neighbor down, ready to lose the only thing he had left in this whole life, that patch of dirt. Silas walked up to the middle of the yard, savoring every second of that long-awaited moment. He stopped the eviction paper right in Walter's face and said it loud, for the whole crowd watching from a ways off. "Your time's up, old man. Sign right here at the bottom and get out of my sight forever." It was right then that the ground started to shake, and a big cloud of dust came up down at the mouth of the road. At first, nobody could make out what that rumble of thunder coming from far off even was, Then the first truck showed up, then the second, then the third, and they just kept on coming up the hill. It was 15 huge trucks, brand new, shining in the sun, climbing up in a line and kicking up a dust that near about blacked out the sky. Silas stood there, mouth hanging wide open, the eviction paper going limp in his hand. The folks who'd come up the hill to watch the old man fall started backing up and pointing, murmuring low to each other, not one of them able to guess what all them trucks meant. The court officers looked at each other, then at Silas, waiting on him to say something, but the rancher just stood froze in place, his mouth working with no sound coming out. The dust rolled over everybody and settled slow. The trucks stopped side by side, ringing the whole yard, and all them engines shut off at the same time, in a silence that put a chill right in your soul. The door of the first truck opened real slow, and out stepped a man in good boots, a fine hat, and rich man's clothes, but with a face that took Walter just 1 second to know. The old man near about lost his legs from all the feeling running through him. It was Nathan. The same Nathan who 10 years back was lying in the mud, near about dead, begging to die on the side of the road. Only now he was a whole different man. Strong, well-dressed, walking firm like a fella who'd won at life with a whole lot of sweat. He walked slow to the middle of the yard, looked at old Walter with his eyes full of water, and broke into a great big smile. Nathan came up to Walter, took off his hat out of respect, and said with his voice shaking with feeling, loud enough for everybody to hear, "I told you I'd come back, Walter. You didn't believe me. Nobody here believed me. But I came back." And then he hugged the old man with all his might, and the two men cried like little children in the middle of the yard, in front of the whole town watching without understanding a single thing. The crowd that had come up to laugh at Walter went dead quiet, not knowing what in the world was happening. Silas, off to the side, scrunched up his brow and squeezed the eviction paper in his hand, feeling for the first time in 10 years a strange little chill run down his spine. Nobody there had any idea who that rich man with the trucks was, but everybody could feel that something mighty big was about to happen. When he let go of the hug, Nathan turned to the crowd and told the whole story so everybody could hear it. He told how he'd been saved on that rainy night, how that poor old man had sold a whole life of cattle to pay for his daughter's surgery. And then he called out, turning toward the trucks, "Annie, come here, my girl." Out of one of the trucks stepped a beautiful young woman in a light-colored dress. The little 6-year-old girl who was dying 10 years back was now a young woman of 16, healthy and full of life, all on account of that surgery. She ran across the yard, knelt down in front of Walter and Martha, and kissed the rough hands of them both, calling them Grandpa Walter and Grandma Martha. Martha broke down into nothing but tears and hugged the girl tight, like she was her own blood granddaughter. Annie held onto the old couple's hands and looked up at them with tears running down her face and said it soft, "You saved my life, and I never even got to meet you till today. My daddy told me about you every single night I can remember." Walter couldn't say a word. He just cupped the girl's face in his rough hands and nodded, and the tears rolled down into the deep lines of his old face. Nathan then explained to everybody what had happened in his life over them 10 years. With the money left over from the surgery, he started over from flat nothing, bought a few head of skinny cattle, worked like a condemned man from sunup to sundown, and kept growing and growing till he turned into one of the biggest cattlemen in the whole country. And he told them all. All of this started on that rainy night, with a bowl of broth. And then Nathan pointed at the 15 trucks and said to Walter with a great big smile, "Walter, you sold 20-odd cows to save my little girl. In these trucks here, there's 500 head of the best cattle there is in this country, and all of it, every last one, is yours. I told you I'd pay you back 1,000 times over, and a real man keeps his word." The whole town stood there with their mouths hanging wide open. It was right at that exact moment that Nathan finally turned his head and laid eyes on who was standing there in the yard, with the eviction paper shaking in his hand and his face white with fright. When Nathan's eyes crossed with the rancher Silas's, his grin dropped in a second, and something old, heavy and full of pain came over that man. He started walking slow toward the neighbor. Nathan stopped right in front of Silas, looked the rancher up and down, and asked him with a voice cold as ice, "You don't remember me, do you, Silas? It's been about 12 years now. I had a good farm 200 miles from here. It was you who cheated me with a fake contract, took my land, and threw me out on the street with a little girl in my arms." The whole square held its breath. Silas started sweating cold and stammering, trying to deny it any way he could. I don't know what you're talking about, man. You got me mixed up with somebody else." But Nathan pulled a thick folder full of documents out from inside his jacket and waved it in front of everybody. He said it real loud. "I kept every paper, Silas. 10 years gathering proof. And now you're going to give back everything you stole, with the law right on top of you." And then Nathan did the thing nobody in that yard saw coming. He took one more step toward Silas, looked deep into the eyes of the man who'd wrecked his life and gone and wrecked Walter's on top of it, and threw right back in his face the very same line the rancher had used to shame the old man for 10 years straight. "You go around telling everybody that kindness don't pay the bills, do you, Silas?" Nathan took a deep breath and finished, with his voice firm so the whole town could hear it good. "Well, you listen close. It was the kindness of this old man, the one you shamed so bad, that pulled me up out of the mud. And it was your meanness that dug the hole you're about to fall into now. Kindness don't pay the bills, Silas. Then explain to me real good how the beggar you threw out on the street bought up everything you own." The whole square blew up in a murmur of shock and wonder. Silas took a step back, tripped over his own feet, and near about fell down flat in the yard in front of everybody. Nathan then turned to the court officers, pulled a fat check out of his pocket and said, "This debt of Walter's, you don't need to collect it anymore. I already paid all of it. You can tear up that eviction paper this very minute." And he put the money right in their hands. But it didn't stop there. Nathan told everybody so they could hear that, over the last few months, he'd quietly bought up every debt Silas had at the banks, the same dirty way the rancher had done to Walter years back. Now it was Nathan holding Silas in the palm of his hand. He looked at the neighbor and said it easy. "The game's turned all the way around, Silas. Now I'm the one who runs your life." Silas dropped to his knees in the middle of the yard, in front of the whole town he'd called out there himself to watch old Walter's shame. Only now the one being shamed was him, the richest and proudest man in the whole region, down on his knees in the dirt, begging for forgiveness from a man he'd once called a beggar and thrown out on the street. The wheel had turned all the way around on him. The law came down on Silas with everything it had. The documents Nathan kept for 10 years proved every last one of the rancher's crooked deals, not just against Nathan, but against dozens of poor families he'd cheated over the years with them fake contracts. Silas lost his land, lost his money, and on top of it, had to answer behind bars for every single mean thing he'd ever done. The land Silas had stolen got handed back, one piece at a time, to the poor families he'd run off without a shred of mercy. And the man who'd once been the most powerful in the region left that town real quiet, head down, without one single soul to feel sorry for him. Nobody ever heard tell again of the arrogant rancher who used to go around saying, with contempt, that kindness didn't pay a single bill. As for old Walter and Martha, the last years of their life got turned clean around. Nathan not only gave the cattle back multiplied, he made Walter a real partner, and together the two of them built one of the biggest cattle farms in the region. Only this time it was a different kind of farm, one that gave honest work and food on the table to everybody who needed it, without ever once shaming a soul. Nathan bought the couple a fine new house, but Walter and Martha made a point of staying on that same little patch of ground as always, only now all fixed up and full of life. Annie, the young woman the two of them saved without even knowing it, took to calling them her real grandparents and came to visit every week. And later on she brought the grandkids that came along to run and play in the big yard. And that same town that once laughed at Walter, that called him a fool and a dummy right to his face, now dropped its head in shame whenever it passed him by. Plenty of folks came up to say they were sorry, and the old man took them all in with a smile, holding no grudge against anybody. Because Walter had learned a thing no money can buy. A man who does good with an open heart don't need to collect a thing back. And every time they asked Walter if he didn't hold any anger over all them years of humiliation, the old man just smiled, looked out at the green pasture full of fat cattle, and answered the same thing as always. I learned that you don't do good expecting change back. You do good because that's how you sleep in peace at night. Only sometimes, when you least expect it, the good comes right back and knocks on your door. And that's how a simple countryman, who near about everybody called a fool for giving away everything he had, proved to the whole town that the greatest riches in this world ain't the kind you keep in the bank, but the kind you keep in your heart. Because when all is said and done, sooner or later, life always finds a way to settle up with the ones who do good and the ones who do evil. Now let me ask you something. Do you really believe that life always ends up making the ones who do evil pay the price and rewarding the ones with a good heart? Tell me down in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, go ahead and hit that like button, then subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story.